My girlfriend told me, "You're a good man, but I need something different." I thanked her for the honesty, let her go without drama, and focused on my own direction. Later she reached out again when different didn't feel as peaceful as expected. "You're a good man," she said it the way a judge reads a verdict. Calm, measured, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror 3 times before sitting down across from me. "But I need something different." I remember the exact sound the ceiling fan made in that moment. That low, rhythmic hum, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. I didn't speak right away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and I could see it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even conflicted. She had already made the decision. I was just the last stop on a journey she'd been taking alone for months. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Her name was Nora. We had been together for 2 years and 4 months. I was 29, she was 27, and we lived in a mid-sized city in the Pacific Northwest where it rained enough to make you think too much. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were solid. I thought we had built something real. Apparently, real wasn't the same as right. Not for her. "What does different mean?" I asked. Not defensively, not with my voice cracking, just honestly. Because if she was going to end 2 years with a word, I at least deserved to understand which word she'd chosen. She exhaled. She looked down at her hands for a second, then back up at me. "It means I need someone who challenges me more. Someone who's more unpredictable. Someone who makes me feel like I can't fully read what's coming next." I nodded slowly. "So you want someone who's harder to understand?" She tilted her head slightly. "That's not exactly how I'd put it. But yeah," she added. "Kind of." I sat with that for a moment, just letting it settle. Because what she was describing wasn't a flaw in me. It was a preference. And preferences don't respond to arguments. I want to be honest here, because that's the only way this story makes sense. My first instinct was not peace. My first instinct was a wall of heat behind my eyes, and the very specific urge to ask her whether she understood what she was throwing away. I wanted to say, "Do you know how many nights I stayed up when your anxiety was bad? Do you know how many times I chose you over things I wanted to do? Do you know what kind of man actually shows up like that?" I wanted to say all of it, but I didn't. Because I had enough self-awareness to recognize that listing your own contributions in the middle of a breakup isn't strength. It's just dressed up begging. And I refused to beg. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay. Yeah," I said. "I appreciate you telling me directly. That actually means something. Most people wouldn't." She looked at me like she was expecting a different scene. Like she had braced for raised voices or slammed doors or the kind of emotional implosion that gives people something to process. Instead, she got me, sitting across from her, completely still. "You're not even going to fight for this?" she asked. And that question, that specific question, told me everything I needed to know about where her head was. "Fight how, Nora?" I asked. "You just told me what you need. And what you need isn't me. What would fighting accomplish?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I guess I thought you'd at least." "At least what?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Never mind." She left that evening. She took the 2 boxes she'd already packed, which, again, told me the planning had been happening for a while, and she walked out of the apartment we'd shared for 14 months. I held the door open for her. She paused in the doorway, looked at me one more time with something in her eyes that I couldn't fully name. Not regret, exactly. More like confusion. Like she had expected this moment to feel more certain than it did. "Take care of yourself," I said. She nodded once, and then she was gone. I closed the door, stood in the hallway for about 40 seconds. Then I went to the kitchen, made a bowl of pasta, and watched a documentary about deep-sea fishing. I want to be clear about something. That night was not easy. The pasta was fine, the documentary was actually interesting, but somewhere around 11:30, the quiet of the apartment turned into something that had weight to it. The kind of weight that sits on your chest when you're lying in the dark and your brain starts its inventory. The pillow on the other side. The extra toothbrush she'd forgotten. The grocery list still on the whiteboard near the fridge with her handwriting on the top half. I didn't fall apart, but I also didn't pretend that 2 years just evaporates cleanly. It doesn't. It leaves a shape behind. Like furniture you've moved, you can still see the indentations in the carpet. My closest friend at the time was a guy named Owen. We'd been friends since college. The kind of friendship where you don't need to manufacture conversation because the silence is already comfortable. He called 2 days after the breakup. I hadn't told him yet. "You good?" he asked. "Nora and I broke up," I said. Silence. "Bro." "Yeah. What happened?" She said she needed something different. More silence. What does that even mean? It means exactly what it sounds like, I said. She wanted someone less predictable. Someone she couldn't read as easily. Owen was quiet for a second. Then, so she left a stable, decent dude because he was too stable and decent. Essentially, that's, I know. Did you at least? I thanked her for being honest and let her go. Another pause. You're a strange man, he said. And I mean that with complete respect. I laughed for the first time since the breakup. It was small, but it was real. Here's the thing about being the person who doesn't make a scene. Nobody gives you a medal for it. You don't get applause. People aren't standing on the sidelines saying, look at how emotionally mature he handled that. What actually happens is quieter and less cinematic. You just go back to being you. Except now there's more space in your life. And you have to decide what to do with that space. I work in urban planning. Specifically, I do community infrastructure consulting, which is a fancy way of saying I help cities figure out what to build and where to build it so that the people who actually live there don't get squeezed out. It's work I care about, but I had gotten lazy with it. Not in the obvious ways. I still showed up, still delivered, still got decent results. But I had stopped pushing. I had stopped taking on projects that scared me. I had gotten comfortable. And comfort, I was starting to realize, had been quietly eating at me for years. So I signed up for a regional planning conference I'd been putting off attending for 3 years straight. I reached out to a firm in another city that I had been too cautious to contact. I started waking up at 6 instead of 7:15. Not because of some self-help manifesto. Just because I had the space to. Just because no one was there to ask what I was doing up so early. About 3 weeks in, I ran into Nora's friend Tessa at a coffee shop. Tessa and I had always been friendly in that secondary orbit kind of way. Close enough to be pleasant, not close enough to be real. She looked surprised to see me. Hey, she said. Hey, I said back. We made the kind of small talk that happens when two people are both aware of the elephant in the room, but have tacitly agreed not to name it. Then, just as we were wrapping up, she said. For what it's worth, she didn't realize what she had. I looked at her. I appreciate that, I said. But she had to make the choice that made sense to her. Tessa studied me for a moment. You're really not bitter about it. No. Why not? I thought about that for a second. Because being bitter would mean I'm still orienting myself around her decision, I said. And I'd rather orient myself around my own. Tessa nodded slowly. That's either very healthy or very cold, she said. Maybe both, I replied. She smiled at that. The conference I attended was in Portland. 3 days, 200 attendees, half of them people who'd been doing this work for decades. I didn't go to network. I went because I genuinely wanted to hear what people were building. But networking happened anyway, the way it does when you're actually interested in the conversations. I met a woman named Claire on the second afternoon. She worked for a firm doing transit equity research, basically figuring out who gets left behind when cities redesign their public transportation systems. She was sharp, funny in a dry, low-effort way that I found immediately disarming. We ended up talking for about 2 hours over mediocre conference coffee. She had no idea I'd just gone through a breakup. I had no idea she'd moved to a new city 8 months ago and was still finding her footing. We were just two people who liked the same obscure field and found each other genuinely interesting. I gave her my card. She gave me hers. We did not make any promises about what that meant. Back home, I got a text from a number I didn't have saved anymore. Hey, hope you're well. I stared at it for a moment. Then I saved the number under a single initial, N, so I wouldn't forget who it was. And then I put the phone down and went back to the report I was writing. 3 days later, another text. I've been thinking about how our last conversation went. I think I was more confused than I let on. I read it. I sat with it. And then I typed back. I think that's probably true. I hope you're figuring things out. Short. Honest. Not cold. Not warm. Just factual. She didn't respond for 2 days. I want to stop here and explain something about what was happening in my head. Because from the outside, people might assume that someone receiving messages like that from an ex they still had feelings for would be strategizing. Playing it cool to draw her back in. Running some kind of long game. That was not what was happening. What was actually happening was simpler and less dramatic. I was genuinely unsure what I wanted. And I had made a decision, somewhere around week 3 of being alone, that I was not going to make any major emotional decisions while I was still in the window of raw aftermath. My therapist, a quiet man named Dr. Aldridge who had a habit of asking the exact question you were hoping he wouldn't, had told me years ago, The version of yourself that makes decisions in the first 60 days after a loss isn't the version you want making long-term choices. I had ignored that advice before. I was not ignoring it this time. Owen came over that Friday night. We ordered takeout and watched whatever basketball game was on. At some point, during halftime, he asked, "You heard from her?" "A couple texts," I said. "What kind of texts?" "The kind that say she's thinking about how things ended." Owen chewed on that. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing right now," I said. "Nothing. I'm not in a position to make a good decision about that yet." Owen looked at me with that expression he gets, half impressed, half suspicious. "You've changed," he said. "I'm the same." "No," he said. "You're different. A year ago, you would have been on the phone with her within 48 hours of her first text." I didn't argue with that, because he was right. The thing about Nora, and this is important context that I kept circling back to during those weeks, is that she wasn't a bad person. She wasn't manipulative. She wasn't cruel. She was someone who had grown up with a very specific idea of what passion was supposed to feel like in a relationship. Her parents had this volatile, high-drama love story that she had watched as a kid with a kind of reverence. They fought loudly and made up loudly, and everything was always at 11. She had absorbed that as the template, and I, for all my reliability and steadiness, must have felt like a radio permanently set to a comfortable 6. I understood that. I genuinely did. But understanding something doesn't mean accepting it as your problem to fix. She needed to learn that on her own. Some lessons you cannot borrow from someone else's clarity. You have to sit in the confusion yourself until it teaches you what you need to know. 6 weeks after the breakup, I got an email from Claire. She was forwarding a research paper she thought I'd find interesting, something about displacement patterns in cities that had recently overhauled their zoning laws. I read the paper. I sent back a 2-paragraph response about a case study I knew that connected to it. She replied within the hour. We went back and forth for about 45 minutes. And then she said, "I'm going to be in your city in 2 weeks for a site visit. Would you want to grab coffee?" I looked at that message for a while. Not because I was conflicted about whether I wanted to, but because I was checking myself, making sure I was operating from something real and not just from the rebound instinct that masquerades as genuine interest. I thought about it honestly. The answer was, I actually just like talking to her. So I wrote back, "I would, yeah? Let me know when you're in town." Around this same time, the texts from Nora got a little more frequent. Not overwhelming, but more personal. I think I made this decision from a place of restlessness rather than clarity. I read that one twice. "I've been seeing someone. It's not going the way I expected." I didn't respond to that one immediately. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to think about what I actually meant before I said it. The next morning, I texted back, "I'm sorry to hear that. What did you expect?" Her response came quickly. "I expected to feel more alive, more on edge, more like there was something to chase. Instead, I just feel tired." I sat with that for a long time. There was a version of me, the version Owen had described, the one from a year ago, who would have felt a surge of something at reading those words. Vindication, maybe, or hope, or the very human and very ugly satisfaction of watching someone realize they had made a mistake. I felt none of that. What I felt was something closer to quiet recognition. "Yeah," I wrote back. "That kind of chasing is exhausting. I hope you find what you're actually looking for." She didn't reply for almost a week. Coffee with Claire was good, not electric, not the kind of thing you write poetry about, just genuinely good. She was easy to be around. She asked real questions and listened to the answers. She told me about her sister's wedding the previous summer and the speech she'd accidentally made too honest, and the way the whole table had gone quiet before her aunt started laughing. I told her about the urban planning project I was starting to develop, a proposal for a mid-sized city in the Midwest that wanted to redesign its downtown core without pricing out the people who had built the neighborhood. She said, "That's the kind of work that actually matters. Not performatively, just as a statement." I appreciated that. We stayed for almost 3 hours. When she left, she said she'd be back in the city in about a month for a follow-up visit. "We should do this again," she said. "Yeah," I said. "We should. No drama. No electric undercurrent of what this meant or where it was going. Just two people who liked each other's company making a low-pressure plan to see each other again." I had forgotten what that felt like. Month 2.5 post-breakup, I heard through a mutual acquaintance, a guy named Victor who had been friends with both of us, that Nora and the new guy had ended things. Victor mentioned it the way you mention weather. "Heard she's not seeing that guy anymore." "Yeah." I said. "Yeah." Sounded like it got pretty intense pretty fast, and then burned out. I nodded. Makes sense, I said. Victor gave me a look. You're really not going to say anything more than that. What else would I say? I don't know, man. He shrugged. Most guys would have something. I hope she's okay, I said. That's genuinely the extent of what I feel about it. Victor stared at me. You should teach a class, he said. The night after I heard that, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I sat outside on the balcony with a beer and I just thought. Not about Nora specifically. About the last 2.5 years. About who I had been in that relationship. I had been good to her. I was certain of that. Patient, present, reliable. But I had also, somewhere along the line, stopped being as driven as I used to be. I had slowed myself down. Not consciously. Not because she'd asked me to. But because there's a thing that happens in long-term comfortable relationships. You start to synchronize your pace with someone else's. And I think, without realizing it, I had tethered myself to a version of life that felt safe and shared, but that didn't actually have enough forward movement in it for someone like me. The breakup had hurt, but it had also, genuinely, set me loose. And I was just now starting to understand how much I had needed that. About a week after learning about her breakup, Nora texted me again. This one was different. Can we talk sometime? Not to get back together or anything like that. I just want to talk. I think I owe you more of an explanation than I gave you. I read it. I set the phone down. I picked it up again. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not what would be dramatic. Not what would make a good story. What I actually wanted. And the honest answer was, I was curious. I had made my peace with the ending. But I was still a person who valued understanding things clearly. And there had been enough in her texts over the past weeks to make me think she had processed some things I hadn't had access to. I wrote back. Sure. Saturday morning. That diner on Clement Street. Public place, low stakes. Just two people talking. She said, that sounds good. Thank you. Saturday came. I got there first. Took a booth near the window. Ordered coffee. When she walked in, I noticed two things. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And she looked relieved to see me. She sat down across from me. We did the brief, careful hello. And then she looked at me directly and said, I don't know how to start this. Start wherever feels true, I said. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said, about what I thought I wanted. And whether what I thought I wanted was actually what I wanted, or just what I thought passion was supposed to look like. I didn't say anything. I let her keep going. Growing up, you know how my parents were. Yeah, I said. I watched them and I thought that's what love looks like. That constant motion. That friction. She paused. It took me getting exactly what I thought I wanted to realize that what I was chasing wasn't connection. It was stimulation. She said the word like it cost her something. And stimulation and connection are not the same thing. She looked at me. You were connection. Real, consistent, honest connection. And I left that because it didn't feel like enough adrenaline. I watched her face. She wasn't performing this. There was no manipulation in it. It was just a person who had gone out and found what they said they needed and then had to sit with the gap between expectation and reality. How did it go? I asked. With him. She exhaled a short, humorless breath. Exactly like you'd expect. The first month was thrilling. He was spontaneous and intense and unpredictable. He made me feel like I was always standing on the edge of something. She shook her head. And then I realized standing on the edge of something is exhausting when you never get to rest. He canceled plans constantly. He'd disappear for days and come back like nothing had happened. He said caring too much was a form of control. She paused on that one. He actually said that. That caring too much was control. I didn't say anything. I kept waiting for it to settle into something stable, she said. I kept thinking, okay, the intensity will balance out. It won't always feel like this. She looked out the window for a second. It didn't balance out. It just got more chaotic. And I ended it. She looked back at me. And then in the quiet afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I had left someone who actually showed up. Because showing up felt boring. She said it with something that looked like genuine shame. I'm not proud of that. I took a sip of my coffee. The diner was filling up around us. A couple at the table nearby was sharing a plate of eggs and arguing lightly about what to do with the rest of their weekend. Normal life on all sides. I appreciate you saying all of this, I said. I mean that. I know it wasn't easy to say. She looked at me. Are you angry? No, I said. Not even a little. There was a moment at the beginning, I admitted, when I wanted to list everything I'd done for the relationship and make you feel guilty. But I didn't. Because it wouldn't have changed anything. And it would have made both of us feel worse. She was quiet. I thought you'd be angrier, she said. Why? Because I left someone good for something that turned out to be nothing. I guess I expected you to be, she searched for the word. Vindicated. She nodded. I'm not, I said. Honestly, I understand how you got there. I understood it then. Your parents gave you a blueprint, and I didn't match it. That's not a character flaw in either of us. It's just incompatibility. She looked at me for a long moment. How do you do that? She asked quietly. Do what? See things that clearly. I thought about that. I had a lot of quiet time, I said, and I decided to use it honestly instead of just feeling things about it. Here's what I did not do in that diner. I did not lean across the table and say, so what does this mean for us? I did not offer some reconciliation. I did not let the moment carry me somewhere I hadn't decided to go. Because here's what I understood about what she had just told me. She wasn't coming back because she had chosen me. She was coming back because the alternative had failed. And those are not the same thing. Not even close. Choosing me, actively, clearly, with full knowledge of what stable and real and present actually looks like. That would mean something. But returning to the known harbor because the stormy sea turned out to actually be stormy? That's just exhaustion in search of a soft place to land. And I had done too much work on myself in the past few months to let someone else's exhaustion become my responsibility. What are you hoping for? I asked her. From today. From this conversation. She looked at me. Honestly, I think I wanted to see if there was still something there, she said. Between us. I think I wanted to know if the door was still open. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. Can I be honest with you? I asked. Please, she said. When you left, I said, I let you go completely. I didn't hold back. I didn't leave a candle in the window. I went back to myself. And the version of myself I've found in the last few months is someone I actually like more than who I was when we were together. She listened. That's not a criticism of you, I said. I got comfortable in ways that weren't good for me, and I needed the disruption to see that. So in a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened. She looked pained by that, not in a jealous way, in the way of someone realizing a thing they gave up has grown in their absence. But, she said, because she could hear the but coming. But I don't think going backward gets either of us where we're going, I said. I've started building something new for myself, and I think you need to do the same. Not as a version of me, not as someone chasing the old blueprint you grew up with, but as your own thing, whatever that looks like. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just sat with it, and I think somewhere under the disappointment, she knew it was right. We finished our coffee. We talked a little more, not about the relationship, just about life. She mentioned she was thinking about going back to school for something she'd been putting off. I told her about the Midwest project I was developing. She smiled at that. That sounds like something you'd be really good at, she said. I think I might be, I said. When we stood to leave, she looked at me with that same expression I'd seen in the doorway of the apartment. But this time the confusion was smaller, like some of the static had been resolved. I think I needed to lose you to understand what I actually had, she said. That's a hard lesson, I said. Yeah, she said. It is. She hugged me. It was brief and real and clean. No undertow. And then she left. And I sat back down, ordered another coffee, and called Owen. How'd it go, he asked. Well, I said. Did she want to get back together? She wanted to see if the door was open. Was it? No, I said. Not in the way she was hoping. Owen was quiet for a second. How do you feel? I thought about that genuinely. Good, I said. Really? Yeah. Not sad at all. A little, I admitted. It's still a loss. But it's an honest one. And I'd rather have an honest loss than a confused reunion. Owen made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. I'm getting you a cape, he said. You cannot keep being this. This what? Reasonable, he said, like it was an insult. It's unsettling. Everybody needs at least one unreasonable friend, I said. That's what I have you for. He laughed. An actual laugh this time. Claire came back to the city about 3 weeks later. We got dinner instead of coffee this time. She was in the middle of a project that was running over deadline, and she spent the first 20 minutes of dinner sending apologetic work emails while making faces at her phone that I found genuinely funny. I'm sorry, she said finally, putting the phone face down. I'm officially present. How's the deadline coming? I asked. It's fine, she said. Terrible and fine. We talked for 4 hours. About work. About the city she'd moved from and why. About a road trip she'd done alone the summer before that changed the way she thought about solitude. She asked about what I'd been working on. I told her about the project in detail, the community meetings, the resistance from the city council, the small breakthrough we'd had when we brought in a coalition of local business owners who had been there for 30 years and understood the neighborhood in ways that no one at a planning table fully did. Her eyes lit up at that. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" she said. "You can't design a community from outside it." "Exactly," I said. "You have to actually listen." We looked at each other across the table, and there was something there. Not manufactured, not rushed, just something that had grown naturally from two people who kept choosing to actually talk to each other. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah. You mentioned you got out of a long relationship a few months ago. You don't have to answer this, but are you in a place where you're actually looking for something new? Or are you still in the clearing out stage?" I appreciated the directness. I had come to expect it from her. "I think I'm genuinely past the clearing out stage," I said. "I know you can't always tell, but I've done a lot of actual processing. And when I think about the future, it doesn't have an old shape in it. It has a new one." She nodded. "Okay," she said simply. "Good to know. No pressure. No push. Just, okay. Noted. Let's proceed accordingly." I smiled. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said. "Just," I paused. "You're easy to be honest with." She smiled back. "Good," she said, "because I have very little patience for anything else." I want to take a minute here and say something clearly, because I know how these stories usually get told. The ex comes back, the narrator makes some triumphant choice, and either the reunion is the victory or the rejection is the victory, and either way someone walks away looking like they won. That's not what this is. What this is, at its core, is a story about what happens when you stop spending your emotional energy on circumstances you can't control and start putting it somewhere real. When Nora told me she needed something different, it broke something open in me. Not in a dramatic, narrative convenient way. In the way a crack in a wall eventually lets in a draft you didn't know you were missing. I had gotten still. And not the good kind of still. The kind where you mistake inertia for peace. The kind where you keep choosing comfort over growth, because growth requires you to look directly at the places you've been avoiding. The breakup forced me to look. And what I found wasn't a wound. What I found was a version of myself that had been waiting for the noise to stop. About 2 months after the diner conversation, I got a final message from Nora. Not a conversation starter. Not a reach out looking for something. Just a message. "Hey, I started that grad school application I'd been putting off for years. Just wanted to tell someone who'd actually understand why that matters." I smiled at that. I wrote back, "That's a real thing. Good for you." She replied with a single thumbs up. That was the last time we communicated. And it was exactly right. No heavy curtain call. No dramatic final exchange. Just two people who had mattered to each other, moving forward in directions that made sense for who they actually were. The Midwest project got approved. Full scope, full budget, community-led oversight committee built into the structure from the ground floor. It was the first time in my career that I had seen a proposal make it through intact. Not trimmed, not compromised, not redesigned by someone at the top who had never walked the streets we were talking about. I called Owen when I found out. He made a noise like he'd just watched a field goal at the end of regulation. "That's huge," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It is." "You sound calm about it." "I am," I said, "but in a good way. Like the kind of calm that comes from actually earning something." Owen was quiet for a second. "I'm proud of you," he said. Not as a throwaway line, as something he'd chosen to say. "Thanks, man," I said. Claire and I had been seeing each other, informally, without a label, but consistently and honestly, for about 6 weeks by that point. When I told her about the project approval, she sent me a voice message instead of a text, which was very her. I played it in my car, and she sounded genuinely excited, like someone who understood exactly what that kind of win meant. "That's your thing," she said. "You built that from the right place. That's not luck. That's you." I sat with that for a minute, and I thought about where I'd been a few months before, sitting in an apartment by myself, watching a documentary about fishing, eating pasta in the quiet, trying to figure out what the shape of forward actually looked like. And the answer, I was learning, wasn't a single destination. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a vindication. It wasn't even a new relationship. It was just becoming more yourself, more deliberately, more honestly, with less tolerance for the things that keep you from it. I don't know exactly what the lesson is here. I'm suspicious of stories that hand you the lesson in a bow. But if I had to say something useful, it would be this. There is a version of letting go that's really just suppression wearing the mask of acceptance. That's not what I did. What I actually did was something harder. I looked at the loss clearly. I felt what it actually was. I didn't perform serenity. I worked toward it. And I worked toward it by pointing myself in a direction that was mine and not borrowed from a dynamic that had ended. When Nora came back, and she did come back, which surprised fewer people who knew us than you might expect. It wasn't a test of my willpower. It was a test of my clarity. And the answer that came from inside me, when I sat quietly and listened for it, wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about whether she deserved it or I deserved it. It was just, you've already moved forward. Don't reverse the direction. Owen came over a few weeks after the Midwest Project news. We sat on the balcony. He had a beer. I had tea, which he mocked me for. It was a clean evening. Not too cold. The kind where the sky holds light longer than it should. You really okay? He asked. Not a check-in. A genuine question. Yeah, I said. More okay than I've been in a while. Even with everything. Because of everything, I said. He looked at the sky. You know what I've noticed about you these last few months? He said. What? You stopped making yourself smaller. I looked at him. I didn't realize I was doing that. I said. I know, he said. That's the thing. He took a sip of his beer. She didn't do that to you, by the way. I know that too, I said. You did it to yourself. Gradually. The way you do when you get comfortable. The way everybody does. I nodded. The breakup just stopped the gradual, he said. Yeah. Forced you back to your own direction. Yeah. He was quiet for a second. Good, he said finally. Just that. Good. And it was. A year out from that evening in the apartment. The one with the ceiling fan and the packed boxes and the words I didn't expect. I was sitting at a desk in the city I'd always lived in, working on a follow-up proposal that had grown out of the Midwest Project. A bigger scope. A chance to change how a different city thought about belonging. I had a morning ahead of me. I had a conversation with Claire scheduled for the afternoon. I had dinner with Owen on Thursday. I had a session with Dr. Aldridge on Friday where I knew he would ask me something I wasn't fully ready to answer. I had a whole set of daily realities that were mine, built by choice, not because someone left, not despite it, but because of what I decided to do with the space the leaving created. The ceiling fan is still in that apartment, I assume. I moved to a different place about 6 months after the breakup. Smaller, higher up, better light. I liked it more than I expected to. Turns out when you're not furnishing a space for a shared life that's drifting, you furnish it for yourself. And yourself, it turns out, has good taste. Some mornings I wake up early, before the alarm, before the city gets loud, and I sit in the quiet with coffee. Not because I'm waiting for something. Not because there's something I'm trying not to think about. Just because the quiet is good. The productive kind. The kind where something is always, slowly, becoming. And I think about where I was a year ago. Sitting across from someone who loved me in her way, who looked me in the eye and told me the most honest, painful, necessary truth she had. And I think about what I chose to do with that. I chose not to fight it. I chose not to beg. I chose not to make her the villain of a story where she was really just a person who needed something I couldn't give her. And I chose to make my own direction so real and solid that when she came back, because she did come back, because different turned out to be a wish that the world couldn't fulfill in the way she expected, I wasn't standing in an empty room waiting for her. I was in the middle of something that mattered, moving forward, at full speed. She called me one more time, not to reconcile, just to say one thing. I picked up. She said, I just wanted to tell you, I think the way you handled everything was one of the most dignified things I've ever seen a person do. And I'm sorry I needed to lose it to understand what it was. I said, you don't have to apologize. You were honest with me. That's more than most people manage. She laughed a little. A small, tired sound. You're going to be really okay, she said. I'm already really okay, I said. I know, she said. That's what I mean. I think about that phrase sometimes. You're a good man, but I need something different. And the longer I sit with it, the more I understand it wasn't just a breakup line. It was, accidentally, one of the most useful pieces of information I ever received. Because it forced me to ask a question I hadn't been asking. Not am I good enough? I knew the answer to that. But am I pointed in the right direction? And the answer, when I was finally honest enough to look at it, was not quite. Not yet. But I got there. Steadily. Without drama. Without burning anyone down on the way. And I actually believe this, that the way you respond to being let go says more about you than almost anything else. You can collapse. You can retaliate. You can perform stoicism while falling apart in private. Or you can look at the empty space in front of you and decide that it's not a loss. It's an opening. And then you can build something in it. Something that's entirely, fully, irreversibly yours. That's what I did. And I would do it exactly the same way again.